Welcome to the Secure CIO, the podcast for technology executives who are tasked with hiring and retaining great cybersecurity leaders. Join best-selling author Claire Pales together with industry thought leaders as they answer your questions about sourcing the right leaders, building cybersecurity teams, candidate selection, salaries, skills, and more.
Hello, I'm Claire Pales and welcome to the Secure CIO podcast. Today's guest is Stuart Harrison. Stuart is a passionate and motivated IT executive. His career spans 2 decades and has been primarily focused on the cybersecurity aspect of IT. He has experience ranging from low-level tech engineering through to business leadership. Stuart is currently the CISO at Medibank Private, and I want to welcome him to the podcast today. Stuart, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Claire.
So we just heard a little bit in your bio that you've come from a technical background through to security executive leadership. What role do you think your deep technical skills have played for you in your role as a CISO? And if they do play a role, how do you stay current?
Having a technical expertise and background is absolutely crucial to the role in many aspects. Cybersecurity can often be quite overwhelming, quite complex, has many different moving parts. So I see it as a key part of my role in not only interfacing with the rest of the executive, but actually with the people at the coalface, for lack of a better term, the technical folks, and being able to have a balanced and holistic discussion. I think all too often it's been my experience that sometimes the executive can start to step away from the technicalities of the role. And in an important sort of role to do with risk management, true business risk management, I think it's really, really important that you keep the balance there. So from my perspective, I definitely think as my career has progressed, I've probably shifted more of my focus and my time and my energy, let's say sort of 70% thereof, to working with the rest of the executive, making sure that we're having good business risk discussions. But I definitely keep 20 to 30% of my time to remain current on the technology, because at the end of the day, cybersecurity fundamentally comes down to whether a control is working and effective or not. And as I mentioned, in a very broad and diverse landscape, it's really important to me that I understand some of the technicalities around what the team are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, so that I can help them, using my experience, make informed decisions that really count, and indeed translate that back up to the rest of the executive in terms of helping shape their understanding in what is a fast-paced environment, I think, on any given day.
So it's probably taken you a bit of time throughout your career to get to this point where you know what works for you. And I guess I'm interested, what was that pivotal moment for you in terms of your skill set, from moving from being a technical leader to being an executive that has those true sort of general management or executive skills?
Yes, a good question. I think I had the fortunate opportunity to work in the vendor space for quite some time as part of my career. That gave me a broad technical understanding across a multitude of different disciplines. But that pivotal point for me really came in when I joined one of the big 4 consulting companies. And when I joined KPMG, it was at the time, it really taught me about how to run the business of technology, not just how to run the technical aspects of a technology business. So I really had to use my skill set across a broad range of clients and business problems to think creatively through business problems and how technology can assist with those business problems. And that was probably the biggest turning point in helping shift my mindset away from purely a technical and tools-based focus to what's the value back to the business? How do I actually provide customers and clients the best value from a technology perspective, taking into consideration that, the business in of itself was often directly reliant on technology, but it wasn't a technology company per se. I think a lot of companies also need to realize the fact that in many regards they are a technology company, whether they want to be or not. I'm not talking necessarily about the culture or the services, but many companies' services are now directly reliant on technology almost to deliver everything that they do on a day-to-day basis. And I think my time at Medibank has obviously been crucial as well, because as much as KPMG was probably the pivotal point, I've continued to build on that skill and expertise while I've been at Medibank.
Now you're at Medibank, you've learnt all these sort of senior leadership skills, and one of those skills that I think a lot of people grapple with is succession planning. And I've spoken on the podcast a number of times and also written some blogs about this rise of the 2IC and security teams, and having somebody ready there from a succession planning perspective when the time comes for the CISO to move on. And we do need CISOs to move on because we need to share them around and help others to sort of uplift the industry. So I'm interested in your thoughts on succession planning for CISOs and whether or not you in fact have a 2IC that is sort of your next in command.
First and foremost, I completely agree that succession planning is a vital part of how we do business, and I think every organization should do that. You often hear the old adage of, no one person, a company should be not be dependent or beholden to any one person, and I think that's no different from a CISO perspective. I think to your comment around CISOs needing to move on, I couldn't agree more as well. I never want to become stagnant in my role. I never want to become comfortable. Becoming comfortable means you become complacent, and that takes the edge off. I've actively worked with the rest of the executive team to look at not only people within the security team, but people outside the security team, maybe with good risk management skills, who could potentially take over from me, either on a part-time basis where they need to arrive, or a full-time basis, for the companies, on the company's behalf. Obviously, it's a critical, I think, senior role now in most organizations. So it's really, really important that you put some forethought and some planning into your succession planning as well. And what I mean by that is I think, there are many people out there that bring such great diverse skills. And when I talk about diversity, I'm really talking about diversity of mind and thought process. That's how you get great outcomes for a business. So it's how do we have the right people in the right role today, and work with those people to actually put a career plan and a development plan together, so that we actually have multiple opportunities, and giving multiple people multiple opportunities to potentially take over my role. And in fact, with my leadership team, I often start off when anybody joins the organization, especially the senior leaders, saying, you should be gunning for my role. You should be pushing me really hard. You need to be keeping me honest, but you need to be chasing my position. And sometimes that raises a few eyebrows, but it keeps the team hungry, and it keeps them pushing to always put Medibank first, and to make sure that we have good skills in the organisation on an ongoing basis.
Can I ask you a question just on that? What's your approach when you're hiring? Are you looking for a very sort of niched set of skills in your staff, or are you looking for people that are generalists in cybersecurity that you can move around within your team?
I firmly believe that security begins and ends with people. You can have all the process and technology in the world. If you don't have the right people in place, you're not really going to get very far. The challenge is that you've got to keep those people engaged. You've got to help them feel fulfilled in their role. You've got to give them great opportunities. That's a challenging bit. I suppose circling back to your actual question, it really depends on how successful you are with delivering your strategy, how your strategy changes over time. There will be key roles that are sort of non-negotiables, but I've always viewed it, and I read a great quote online the other day. I can't remember who said it was, if you're going to hire people, you want to hire for aptitude, attitude, or energy and integrity. But if they don't have integrity, don't bother with the first two. And I thought it's such a fantastic, that doesn't only apply to security, it applies to all facets of business. And I think for us, we've tried to be as consistent yet adaptable over time with who we're hiring, based on the changing needs of not only the team, but the organization as a whole and where we're heading. Because Medibank are transitioning we're adapting to be a healthcare company, not just an insurance company. And with that comes elevated levels of risk. As soon as you start to venture into the world of patient care in the true sense of the term, you're going to hold more and more sensitive information. So it's what skill sets do we need to adapt? What people do we need to bring on board over time to meet that expectation, noting that good people are really hard to find.
I love that answer, because I'm a big believer in making sure that your operating model absolutely reflects what your strategy is trying to achieve, and not just your security strategy, but also the organization's strategy. And so it's not just about who do you need to hire, but who do you need to hire to not only achieve the security strategy, but also, in your case, where Medibank is trying to go as a business. And the challenge with that, though, is that, strategies are evolving and living, breathing documents in security more than ever, because, we just can't predict the threats that are coming at us each day. And so to have an operating model where you have a plan to have certain staff inside your organisation and certain services served up to you is something that you have to keep a monitor on all the time, I think.
What we are trying to do is balance what are the knowns. And I'd probably use an example of just good security hygiene. In fact, I'd extend that to just good IT hygiene. There are so many things. There are so many of the attacks, and I don't want to talk about attacks necessarily, but there are so many things from confidentiality and an availability perspective that come undone for companies simply because they're not managing their infrastructure correctly. They're not doing, they're not managing legacy. They're not doing correct patch management, and the list goes on. I'm not saying that these things aren't complex. I'm not saying that we are perfect. I would never say that. But if you drive to do the basics and you do them really, really well, you've covered a substantial part of your business risk, not just your security risk, your actual risk to the business in terms of system availability and the like. So we try and have that balance of focusing on doing the basics and doing them really, really well in a really repeatable, consistent manner, because you can hire staff around that, and you can say, your role, Stuart, as a system engineer is to maintain these systems and do a great job, and you can put some really great metrics and parameters and enablement strategies around that. However, to your point, you also need the freedom and the flexibility to adapt as market conditions change.
It wouldn't be a podcast of mine without talking about the skill shortage and trying to fill our workforce in security with quality candidates. And, this conversation's been going on for years now, and I often ask my guests what they think about this skill shortage, and has it happened? Is it happening? Could it have just been that there's a glut in the market of people with the wrong skills? And the listeners can't see me using air quotes, but right or wrong skills are subjective. But what are your thoughts on this so-called skill shortage?
Look, you're quite right. I mean, this has been the discussion for a very, very long time now, hasn't it? I suppose I've always been intrigued by the question, really, because I'm not sure a skills shortage is the right term to use anymore. There are plenty of other industries that when they go through a boom, they have skill shortages. Pilots were in high demand and short supply not that long ago. I think it's now the inverse until things settle down again. But for me, it's not so much a skill shortage as the question I think we should be asking is, have we as an industry really shaped the right expectations with a lot of the people coming up through the ranks, or maybe people looking for a career change, or both in the true sense of the term, because if we aren't talking and creating the value statement really as to why IT or why cybersecurity is an interesting field to explore, then we've kind of lost people before we've even begun. And then if we can attract those people by clearly defining the value statement and writing it down in just sort of common English and sort of colloquial terms, as it were, if we can attract people to at least have a look at the field, have we done enough to actually shape the discussion that follows that, which is which career path do I take? There are so many different facets of security, so many different things that you could do. I would imagine if I was looking from the outside in, I'd find it very valuable to have somebody just say to me, hey, you could go down these 3 or 4 career paths to begin with. And here's why. I don't know whether we're doing that. I just think we 9 times out of 10 are in a reactive mode. Oh, we need more people that do DevSecOps. But you speak to people, they can't even define what the term means, let alone what it is that you were expecting of people. And that means that the training, education, the career planning, everything that we do isn't really talking to the value of what a DevOps or DevSecOps engineer could do or could provide. I think there are too many marketing buzzwords around at the moment. If you really want to just confuse and probably irritate a few people, you just throw AI, ML, and synergize in the same sentence with a leverage here or there, and off we go. But as somebody looking in from the outside, I would find that not only confusing but irritating, because nobody can give me sort of much guidance. So I think we've got a lot of people training up on a lot of almost the wrong things or in the wrong way a lot of the time, because we as senior leaders are saying, hey, we just want to be secure. Well, that's not good enough. Again, if you go back to your strategy, where are you starting? Do you need to stabilize the ship? Do you need to stabilize the patient? Do you need to stop the bleed? Do you need to build on the solid foundation that's already in place? Are you moving more into a regulated entity where, governance and risk and compliance are going to be a key part of your vocabulary every day? And I don't believe in compliance for compliance sake. I believe in compliance is a byproduct of doing security well. But having some of those parameters in place, again, it shapes the kind of people you need on board, and it also shapes the kind of discussion you need to have around what skills is it that we are looking for, and then how do we help people that are potentially interested in security build that solid career path. The skills shortage is almost a symptom. It's not the root cause. I think there are many other questions that we need to have really strong answers for to address that symptom in the true sense.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting perspective on it because, as I said, I've asked this question quite a few times, and, lots of people come at it from the fact that it is the hiring manager who's not writing the right job descriptions. There are people who say that university degrees are not teaching people true job-ready skills, and so, they're kind of understanding the theory, but then you put them at a computer and they don't have the business acumen to then, execute or apply those skills that they're learning. And then you have others that say, because the world changes so fast, that skills become redundant very quickly. So to your point before, this definition of what a particular person does, in security, there's nothing standardized about, even a CISO can be one thing in one organization and encompass so much more in another organization. So yeah, there's no right answer, but it is a very difficult question to answer. But I want to give you a bit of a scenario now of you're starting a security team from scratch. Who do you hire first? And I don't want to lead your thinking, but in previous podcasts, some of my guests have said, without a doubt, it's their enterprise architect. What do you think? Who would be your first hire?
When I had a great opportunity through KPMG as one of the big four to see so many different clients in a very short amount of space, so many different really interesting problems, so many different cultures as well, so many different organizations and how they operate and how the people in the organization interact and operate. And I think as senior leaders, it's imperative, it's absolutely critical that when you first join the organization, you've got to understand how things get done in the organization. You've got to understand, and culture is a bit of a nebulous thing, but you've got to understand the people, the approach, what's important to the business, how the business operates, the relationship between IT, security and the business, and risk, and so many different facets. When I joined Medibank, I spent a fairly reasonable amount of time actually just sort of getting a read for the lay of the land, because without actually taking a step back and having a look at all of the people and then the process side of things and then the technology side of things, I think people's first, you could interchange process and technology really, but you're not going to have a solid read on what it is that needs to be done. And when I say that, it's probably, I often share this with the team, in any one stream of thought, there can only be one priority one. Unfortunately, that means you're going to have to make a really, really tough call some days in terms of what's priority 2 or 1.1, but there can only be one priority 1. So if there's only one priority 1, I want to make sure that my assessment of the environment and the business itself and the people that make up that business and the services that you're delivering is reasonably accurate, and I need to test that hypothesis. That basically helps me shape a plan from an executive perspective around, are we resetting? Are we building? Are we evolving? Are we migrating? Are we insourcing or outsourcing? Do we even know what the problem statement is? And based on answering some of those questions, I could then say to you, okay, we probably need someone with really strong DevOps skills, because at the end of the day, the infrastructure is flawed. I need somebody that's really strong in the SecOps space, because to be honest with you, maybe the organization just has an untenable, unreasonable high risk position in terms of it's almost certain that something might go wrong. So we need to batten down the hatches and plug all the holes in the ship very quickly. I might actually say to you, do you know what? SecOps is actually really, really strong, but they're completely disconnected from the rest of the business in terms of the value that they bring. So now we start to take on more of a consultative advisory role, where you're going to have somebody who presents really well and gets the business side of things, but heads it up from maybe a GRC perspective. So I think it's a great question, but I probably wouldn't take a cookie cutter kind of approach to it. I would actually say, I'm going to come in, I'm going to understand as much as I can in a short period of time as I can about the organization. And then I'm going to select the best individual that I think can be my wingman or wingwoman, if that's the correct term, if there is such a thing, a wing person, to help me cover as much ground as possible on the highest risk items. And I don't think you can be pigeonholed or siloed in your thought process. I think you've got to be truly open-minded about taking an educated guess at where you go first and making sure that your hiring process is ultimately going to complement the strength of the team in the medium to long term. But it's all about a sequencing of who comes in and when, from my perspective, not necessarily tagging it with one role.
Your thought process around, how do you decide who you hire first could absolutely be applied to the CIO who is thinking, what type of CISO do I hire? And, are we building, are we evolving, are we going through massive change? Are we plateauing after a huge amount of transformation previously? Choosing what type of CISO you then hire, whether it's your first one or a replacement, absolutely comes under that same conversation, I think, and deep thinking, critical thinking about, do I need a CISO who has a strong risk background? Do I need a CISO who's overly, deeply technical? Have they come from here? Have they come from there? There's so many different flavors of CISO background. I think your thought process there could absolutely be applied to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really comes back to that. What is the type of organization and what are the types of services? If they're a really, really technically led organization, maybe one of the new organizations that has been around for sort of 5 or 10 years and they're selling a lot of online services or whatever the case may be, I would say roles reversed. If I was the CIO, I'd be looking for somebody that can definitely, I'm going to say the word keep up, or the phrase keep up with the technical folks. I feel very strongly especially for a CISO, if you don't understand the inner workings of the technology, at least to a fairly high level anyway, at a relatively high level, you're exposing the company and you're exposing yourself really, because sometimes in the more pressured situations, like during an incident or something, you can't afford not to be understanding what your technical folks on the ground are saying to you. And I don't want to leave you with the impression that I somehow manage firewalls on a day-to-day basis. That's not what I'm saying. But I think the technical aspects are really, really important as much as the business risk aspect is.
So you've been managing teams now for a number of years within your career. I'm interested, and I regularly wrap up with this question: what do you wish you had have known when you first started as a leader that you know now? I guess it's kind of that, what would you tell your 20-year-old self question? What's that key thing about leadership that you wish you had have known when you first started?
I wish I would have realized, I suppose, much earlier on, the importance of building personal relationships with your professional colleagues. People are people first and foremost. 10 out of 10 times, you were always a human being before you're a CISO or anything else, right? So I think understanding a bit more about who you are as an individual, what makes you tick, your life's journey to date, without getting sort of too deep too quickly. You've got to do this in a respectful and a sincere manner. It just helps me understand and how you think and you understand how I think. And after that, I think building that relationship means, we can I can tailor my message so that it resonates more quickly and more effectively with you, and vice versa. I think understanding a little bit more about you as a person means that I'm going to go into tough discussions with more empathy, and empathy is really, really important. I think sometimes, particularly for technical folks, it's interesting, and I can speak with authority because I used to do this all the time. You sort of pass advice, which sounds more like judgment on somebody else or what they've done, but roles reversed, with very little in terms of sort of the emotional side of things or the emotional impact coming through. But roles reversed, you probably wouldn't like that message said to you in that particular way. And it's all about, it's not what you're saying, it's how you go about saying it. So I think going back, if I were to look at the beginning of my leadership journey, it's really try and understand, with respect to the professional, the professional sort of hierarchy, for lack of a better term, it's understanding you as a person, what makes you tick, making sure that I've shared from my side a little bit about my life's journey, as it were, and then going forward and saying, if Stuart doesn't respond particularly well to confrontational messages or very direct messages, which may be interpreted as confrontational messages, let's look at the wording around that. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing for me.
You're the second person this season that's alluded to that as their learning. And I had another guest on who talked about emotional intelligence and the journey that he's been on to, similarly to what you're saying, to increase his ability of understanding, how would I feel if this message was given to me? And it can't be underrated. I think it's incredibly important. And so thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of people, young people, need to understand the value of relationships, not just professional ones, but, bleeding a little bit outside that to truly know somebody, because what we front up with at work is only, a percentage of our true personality and a percentage of what we're going through, before we get there and after we leave. So I think it's bang on advice. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I've really enjoyed the chat and what you've shared, and we'll pop some more information about you in the show notes. But for now, I really want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for joining me for today's episode. Feel free to listen to some of the previous guests on your favourite podcast app. For more information on all our guests, check out the show notes at thesecurecio.com, where you can also find more information on the Secure CIO framework, grab free chapters of my book, and sign up for my newsletter. If you love the show, please subscribe to the podcast and feel free to leave me a 5-star rating. I'll see you next week.